Greetings and welcome, everybody. This is another TalkingPointz Chatz Insider. This is a conversation about our insider reports. Dave Michaels is here with me. And Dave, we have a new guest this time, don't we?
We do. We've been having guest contributors on this podcast the last several months now, or 4 months or something like that. And it's a great addition to the program. We have with us today a celebrity, David. We have Kane Sims. Kane is the founder of VUX World, and he has a podcast called VUX World. And I don't know if that's even fair, Kane. Should I say you're the founder of VUX World or VUX or VUX AI? I'm not sure. Maybe
Yeah,
all of them.
all of them. Most people know VUX World. We're currently going through a bit of a rebrand to VUX AI, which will be commencing shortly. But as of right now, yeah, VUX World, yeah.
So I've met you at a few different events in the past, and in fact, I think we met at a Cognigy event, which we're going to be talking about because they're in the news a couple times actually here in June. So we're covering the June news, and we're going to cheat a little bit. I think we'll talk a little bit about the conversational AI Magic Quadrant, which was technically July news, but we got Kane here, so we're gonna have to talk about that anyway. So
Can you guys, before you start on that, can you guys help me with that? Because I don't understand. Conversational AI always used to be chatbots, right? But now the Gartner's saying it's more than that. It's we haven't even fixed AI, and now AI is going to be more than AI was. Somebody help explain that to me.
Kane.
Well, conversational AI was always is really any areas where kind of dialogue was exchanged between, people and systems. So chatbots was the most common interpretation of that, but voice user interfaces have been in play for decades, So you could talk about voice user interfaces, chat interfaces, and even now really kind of multimodal interfaces would also be considered conversational because they rely on a combination of dialogue plus other kind of UI elements. So it's all getting very much blurred, and ultimately we're
Yes.
kind of heading in a direction where everything is a conversational interface to some degree.
Yeah, so actually, let's just jump into this MQ. It came out early in July and surprised a lot of people. There's been actually a lot of conversation about it on LinkedIn, I've seen. And just to kind of sum up right before we get into it, it had, I think it was four leaders. It had Google way off in the best position. And then also in that leaders quadrant was SoundHound, Core, and Salesforce, which really surprised me. Where the hell did that come from? And then I think a lot of people were expecting Nice Cognigy to be in that leaders quadrant. Why? Because they've been there in the past and they've only increased their capabilities over the past few years, but especially the past year. And they were in the visionary quadrant. So, Kane, why don't we get our audience warmed up with the views of Kane Sims on this topic right off the bat? What was your reaction to this MQ?
Similarly surprised, I think. As you said, I'm surprised to see Salesforce in there. The acquisition of Fin, or what was Intercom, I think came very recently. So I don't think
Yeah, yeah, that wasn't covered
I
in
don't think
the
it was a
yeah.
factor. No. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's interesting because I mean, Salesforce, I've always thought is playing catch up a little bit, as are a lot of the kind of new school AI agent vendors. A lot of the kind of, I suppose, traditional, if that's the right way of phrasing it, vendors are a lot more equipped, I think, to take advantage of AI, of generative AI, because they've kind of built their foundations on NLU, and essentially they're using generative AI to essentially complete the package, essentially, in terms of what it takes to be able to build enterprise-grade conversation interfaces. Whereas the likes of Salesforce and some of the other new school vendors, some of which didn't make it on the quadrant but were mentioned, like Decagon and Sierra, they're very much kind of like Gen AI only platforms. And my observations is that those platforms are actually learning the lessons that the other platforms learned in 2016 to 2020, and they're almost like retrofitting a lot of the capabilities that you need into those kind of platforms. So I was surprised to see Salesforce there, surprised to see Google so far in front. But I think what separates Google from everybody else is that no other provider on that list essentially builds their own models. So Google's
Yeah.
unique in that respect because obviously it's got its own proprietary models, and those models can be, tuned and created for very, very specific instances. One of the things that I was kind of curious about is that for Google, it's got about four different products. And it's kind of all of those products have been appraised together as one, which kind of puts it up there. Obviously, they've got kind of like, the agent development kit, they've got Dialogflow CX, which is then conversational agents. Now that's been rebranded to something else for some reason. So that was a bit surprising. I think, for those that have used Google's software, that it's highly capable, but a lot more complex. And
Yeah.
SoundHound, I think, is on there because they've made loads of acquisitions in the last kind of year or
Yeah,
so.
but that's why they're surprised because
Mm,
Gartner typically does not like acquisitions. They have this old school full stack, native stack, build it from scratch. It takes years to fully integrate a solution, and then they not only did they put SoundHound in the leaders quadrant, they even wrote out in their strengths that they've acquired all these great talents. It's like this is
mm,
Gartner. Gartner never says that. They always and in fact, Nice and Cognigy is actually a really good example of that. They seem to get penalized. um, that was really a shocker.
yeah.
I think Gartner's MQ, conversational AI MQ, about 3 or 4 years ago was the first of its kind big analyst report on conversational AI,
Mm,
or one of the first, I should say, and Cognigy was right there in the leaders quadrant, and they had really good momentum, really good brands behind them. It seemed their momentum, if anything, has increased with the Nice
mm.
acquisition, and uh, and especially compared to Salesforce. I I know Salesforce is sold really well, but I haven't heard really great things about its capabilities. And so I wonder sometimes Magic Quadrants and market share reports kind of get confused. And I
Yeah.
was wondering how much of this MQ with Google up on top, Salesforce right behind it, was based on market share. Did you have a reaction like?
Well, I don't know about market share, but I definitely think that it strays into kind of business strategy rather than platform capabilities. For example, Boost was penalized because of its pretty much laser focus on regulated industries. Doesn't change the platform, but basically what it means is that Boost have identified that the most money is being spent by a small number of industries, and so we're going to go and focus on that. And that was one of the reasoning for it being penalized a little bit. Nice was penal, or Cognigy rather, was penalized because of two of the things in there are related to the acquisition. So it's like, well, what are we appraising here? Are we appraising the business and the business model and the targeting strategy and its go to market, or are we appraising the platform as itself? For me, I think
Yeah,
that this should really be just about the platform, and the platform should be graded based on its capabilities. The vision for the platform should be the vision for the platform, not the vision for the company. And the ability to execute should be the ability for the platform to be able to deliver rather than the company itself, because some companies don't have an ability to execute really. Avamo doesn't, and Yellow AI and Natomi, I don't believe they do a whole lot of their own deployments, whereas Boost are very heavy on pro services, Poly AI are very heavy on pro services. So, the ability to execute shouldn't be about that. It should be about the platform. So there's a few things in here that I think, yeah, leave a few things to be desired in some cases. But
One last thing on this topic before we move on is the vendors that were in the MQ versus the vendors that were not in the MQ. Did you have any reaction to that? Because the problem with conversational AI is, pretty much everybody, every contact center vendor, a lot of the UCaaS companies now have kind of moved into that space with their own solutions. I'll think of like Ring Central, for example. They've got a number of conversational AI type of solutions, and so. Did you have any reaction to which companies were not even in the report?
well, I think every CCaaS provider pretty much now, as you say, has got some kind of AI agent or conversational AI capabilities. I think Gartner does, to be fair, I think that you do have to have a criteria for inclusion, and whether you agree with them or not is two different things. But
Yep,
Gartner's inclusion criteria is essentially you've got to be generating X amount of revenue from conversational AI. You've got to have X number of customers across Y number of regions leveraging
yep,
it. And so I think that some of those providers either are excluded on how Gartner might categorize them, or how others might categorize them. A CCaaS provider is a CCaaS provider, conversational AI provider is a conversational AI provider, even though those two things are being conflated and may be the same thing in future. So I think there's that kind of thing, and also it's I don't know, yeah, I think it's mostly down to inclusion criteria, to be honest, because a lot of the ones that didn't make the quadrant but were mentioned in the kind of mentions bit, like Decagon, Ciara, Raza, Paloa, they're all companies who you'd think are quite competent. But for whatever
That's where I
reason,
thought you would go. I thought you'd go right to Sierra because I know a lot of people were expecting Sierra to be a pretty well in this MQ,
yeah,
and but they just didn't meet the. They obviously didn't meet the inclusion requirements, but yeah, even the ones that did meet the inclusion requirements were a lot of surprises there as where they ended up. So
yeah,
fantastic we had you on that particular topic. But I have a feeling conversational AI is going to come up throughout this podcast. Let's take a look at the next topic here. Cisco Live. Now, Cisco Live is a twice a year event. There's a the big one, which took place in June, was in Vegas. And then there's a slightly smaller one in Amsterdam, which I was at about 6 months ago. The Amsterdam one was actually the continuation of the big one. The cycle restarts, and so I can't wait. So I'll see basically what happened in Vegas last month in Amsterdam in 5 months. But anyway, we've got Cisco Live, and they actually had a lot of stuff going on there. David, did you anything jump out at you at Cisco Live?
Well, what's the product? I mean, to me, they're what they're selling at this point nowadays in all of these events is simplification. And you can take that across all the various stacks that are going on. You know, whether it's agentic operations or controlling the cloud with their hub or how security is embedded, not bolted on. They're trying to sell a story that they have a complete picture and it's more simple than everybody else's. And you know, it's a good message. It's a strong message, but in many cases, I think they're trying to sell into a market that's dominated by other players.
Well, not in the networking space, right? And
Not in the networking space,
and
right?
Cisco Live is primarily a networking event. We don't really cover networking in our coverage, but that's the thing, right? And networking is actually kind of consuming Cisco once again. We kind of have this pendulum thing where Cisco goes all into network and kind of, smiles and nods on the other portfolio, and then we also see the opposite happen where they really double down on the WebEx suite and other services and other products. It seems that the WebEx story is really kind of, bifurcated, right? They've got the video devices, and so we've also got Infocom in June. So, and what I just want to say one thing about Infocom before we get to the Infocom topic. Cisco held back announcements. They had announcements at Cisco Live the week before, and then they had Infocom the week after, and they actually held back some announcements just for Infocom. I thought that was very classy, very nice. But anyway, so we're seeing a bifurcated story out of Cisco. We're seeing a lot on devices, and we're seeing a lot around contact center. And so, sure enough, they had some big announcements at contact center. They had the customer experience center had a new AI concierge. They had AI Agent 360, WebEx AI workforce engagement management solution, which is great because that's a brand new area for Cisco. They announced that in Amsterdam 6 months ago, and now they're really doubling down on that, so that's really good. And Yeah, I think those are the main ones out of the suite. But then, of course, your area, David, they had some device announcements as well. That's Cisco Cloud and Control and AI Canvas. So Cisco and Zoom now are using the word Canvas. AI defense stuff, and the workplace stuff. What was the workplace stuff they had? The Board G3. Oh my God, I can't believe I forgot the
Right.
Board G3. The Board Pro G3. They had the Desk Pro G2 and Rootkit Pro previously announced, finally available, and built-in device AI agents. So I think I got everything eventually. It didn't quite flow out the way I wanted it to, but
But
so
again, I
so
think the message was that they're from the net. They're trying to flow from the network outward, and all of their competitors are trying to flow from the devices or the platform and everything else inward. But their story is start with the network. Everything's connected to everything else. Everything has the intelligence built in. It's the agentic story, stronger operations and orchestration layer. The networker gets it. I don't know if everybody else gets it. That's going to really be the question in terms of their move. Some
well,
people
this
think
this will
Cisco
be
is just
interesting.
great hardware.
We'll get interested in Kane's opinion on this, but in addition to everything you just said, they're also an AI play, right? Cisco is actually benefiting dramatically from the surge in AI investments. They're kind of they don't care who wins. They're all going to use Cisco networking gear, and so they've seen their stock do some pretty good appreciation during the AI race, and they're definitely positioning themselves as an AI company. And so a lot of their announcements were around AI. They have a lot of new AI agents, a lot of new AI security capabilities. So they're really doubling down on AI. Are you talking about them more on your podcast, Kane?
No.
Not at all.
No,
Not covered. Not.
I think the thing for Cisco, I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Cisco because I know a lot of people have worked at Cisco over the years. But for me, it's like the networking and security stuff that and devices that seems to be sort of like Cisco's bread and butter. You walk into any office building in London or anywhere, and there's Cisco gear everywhere. The contact center side of things, the layer above that. I never hear a company that uses Cisco's contact center. I never hear about them being in the running when it comes to procuring new contact center systems. Never heard of any enterprise that uses any of Cisco's AI capabilities, but they've got the capabilities. They acquired like what was it, MindMeld years ago,
Yep.
AI platform, IMI Mobile, the CPaaS capabilities. Like I know they've got the engine. For me, I can't never make my mind up about Cisco as to whether or not they're doing it because they have to be seen to be doing it, or if they're doing it because they've got great capabilities and they're really sort of like highly capable. But when I sort of read these announcements, especially on the AI side, it just reads like a tick list of things that we have to be able to do because everyone else is more or less already doing it. AI concierge for CX, AI agent 360, all that kind of stuff is AI assisted ecosystem integrations, new AI agents launch. It's like if you were to just write a press release full of all the stuff that should be in there, it's all in there. So I find it difficult to sort of separate what they've said with how good it actually is because I never hear of any customer actually using it. So it might be absolutely great and fantastic, or it might just be a box ticking exercise. For me,
Yeah,
I can never
they've
tell.
actually got two contact center stories which are better than most people realize.
Mm,
The WebEx contact center, every analyst update they give us, they show us more and more logos. They are winning a lot of accounts on WebEx contact center,
mm,
and it's a pretty clean little contact center. It's not the most robust in the world, but does have a strong AI capability. And they just have a lot of accounts, and a lot of accounts don't need the most advanced contact center. And
mm,
Cisco's doubling down on those investments pretty significantly. And then here's the second play. A lot of the investments they're making in WebEx Contact Center also apply to the WebEx, or not WebEx, the CCE traditional premises-based contact center. And so
mm,
they're doubling down all their AI investments on contact center have two plays, the WebEx Contact Center and Prem. And people always want to dismiss Prem, but Prem is half the market. And what
yeah.
people don't realize is that Prem is pretty much all Cisco at this point because Avaya is more or less not a major, not perceived as a major player anymore. Genesis was pulled out of the premises-based world. Not it's they have an installed base, but they're not upgrading that or selling that like the way they used to,
Mm,
and that leaves Cisco. There's also places companies like Mitel and a bunch of others that are still in that space, but Cisco really kind of inherited the world, right? A lot they're getting a lot of customers from Avaya, they're getting a lot of customers from Genesis, and of course they have their own install base. I think they were number one in North America, and so that base is still there. So they're bringing all these WebEx capabilities there. So Cisco is actually doing really well in contact center, and they're
mm.
doing really well in the AI features for contact center. So
Is that a North America thing though, do you think? Is Cisco predominantly North American based
on the
and
premises side, it's predominantly North America, but I think they're winning on contact center, WebEx contact center globally. But
right.
it tends to be smaller accounts. It's not the big accounts.
So would you
Um,
say that their kind of closest comparator is kind of more of a Zoom contact center rather than
yeah, I think
larger
that's
kind of
good. And in fact, Cisco and Zoom were often kind of come out of the same breath, which is interesting because one thing they announced here was the availability of their note-taking AI agent in meetings. And of course, this Zoom has been really pushing hard in that space as well. And so the two companies are definitely competing over there. Um,
where do you think these guys should focus? So for example, like you've got Cisco who is building a lot of the capabilities that Zoom has in terms of, as you said, meetings and stuff like that. You've got Zoom that is, now it's entered into the contact center marketplace, but it's predominantly being kind of meetings. Yeah, I can at least see a correlation there because it's got a lot of language-based data, so it can build a lot of really powerful models off the back of that. But then you look at some companies like Genesis and their role in AI agents. And I know that there's things on your last kind of update around 8x8, who've historically said, we're not bothered, we're just going to use Cognigy, but then Cognigy got acquired by NICE. So now all of a sudden they've got an AI agent platform. So it's like, where do you think this sort of stuff goes? Do you think that contact center providers ought to be building stuff like, workforce management tools and meeting based tools and AI agent platforms? Or do you think that they should be integrating with specialists?
Holy cow! You don't hold back your question. That's the $1 million question, right? Or $1 billion question. It's really interesting. 8x8 made a big bet on Cognigy, and I think it was a good bet, and I think they had a really good story. The problem was Cognigy got acquired by a competitor, and that kind of made them a little nervous. The last time I talked to 8x8, they're working really closely with SynthFlow.
Mm.
And yeah, I think there was another one as well. But they're still doing Cognigy. And a company like 8x8 is not going to be able to invest as heavily in their own native platform. So their job is to make a great integrated story. And they did that well with Cognigy. They showed a really kind of a best-in-class integration, which I think worked really well. The old school is that you have everything from one vendor and everything is supposed to come from a native stack. I think that's kind of a ridiculous thought at this point because uh, it's just getting everything is CX. Every technology in the world is now a CX technology. And so for one vendor to provide all of that is a lot to ask. On the other hand, and we're going to get to Cognigy here in just a minute with Nice World, um, Nice has made a pretty strong story that by integrating and owning Cognigy, that they've really brought their years of expertise of their intent identification into Cognigy much tighter. And so the answer is all the above, right? We're gonna see in many cases a company like Cognigy really pull rabbits out of its hat with its integrated story, but we're also going to see a lot of impressive best of breeds. You saw the last topic there with the MQ, Google up and to the right. Uh, Almost every contact center vendor has a partnership with Google, and so it's going to be both stories. It's going to be really up to the enterprise to figure out what story makes the best sense for them.
Mm. What are your thoughts on like the contact center, the CCaaS providers in terms of the future? So like for example, you know, let's take Genesis. Genesis, you can build AI agents in Genesis, but the reality is that you're not going to have as quite as good agents as you're going to have through a platform like Cognigy or Boost, because those guys spend every waking minute of every day and have done for the last decade building capabilities to build exceptional conversational experiences. That's entirely different to what CCaaS providers spend their time doing. So some of the stuff that you see from the CCaaS vendors, from my perspective and from what I hear from customers that use it, is a little bit lacking, which is expected. But the reality is, at least this is my kind of belief, and I'd be interested in how you guys think about this. Is I think that the world is moving to a place where every customer touch point is going to be AI mediated first and foremost, and the CCaaS provider is essentially going to end up being the plumbing that comes into play when the AI can't resolve the issue. So if you look at Nice, that was the best acquisition that a company of that kind could have possibly made. And
Yeah.
from hearing what Nice World was like, my hesitation or kind of anxiety around Nice acquiring Cognigy was, oh my God, they're just going to bury Cognigy behind Nice. But what I was hoping for is they put Cognigy out the front door and Nice just becomes the way in which you deal with the stuff that Cognigy can't. And
They,
hearing
they
your
they
kind of
they
reporting
did
on that,
that, and I
that's,
want to get to that, but we got to get the
yeah.
infocom first. But I think what you're touching on is actually really an important topic. The contact center space. You made a comment. You know, they're not investing heavily into conversational AI. I disagree with you on that.
No, no,
The
no.
contact
I
center
didn't
space.
say they're not investing. I was saying that what they've done so far hasn't been at the standard of the rest of the market of those that specialize
I,
in it.
I, I agree with that, but that's changing dramatically. The contact center space used to be about the ACD, used to be about core routing and workforce engagement and all these things that we can think about with contact centers, how to manage queues. Right now, every contact center provider is talking about CX and really talking about conversational AI in the forefront in the first breath. And that's why it's so interesting. What's happening in that space is you've got the CRM vendors, you've got, the ticket companies like ServiceNow. They're all moving into contact center space. And so we're going to see this big disruption in the CCaaS space of where do you get your CCaaS from? Do you get it from a database provider? Do you get it from a comms provider? And that whole space is changing, but they're all saying the same thing. That's why Salesforce is doubling down on Agent Force, and so they're all kind of racing to that same thing from different perspectives, and it's going to be an interesting play. We're going to see. There's another Gartner calls it customer engagement center, which are the CRM vendors, and they have digital contact center solutions, digital channels, and is folding into CCaaS, which of course has the voice contact center capabilities. And it's like I with the convergence was happening, but it's happening differently than I expected. What's happening is all those CRM vendors are becoming CCaaS providers. So all of a sudden, NICE has always been worried about companies like Genesys and and it's behind it in its mirror. But now Cognigy is looking more at Microsoft and Salesforce and Amazon as their primary competitors. So that space is changing dramatically. Genesis, by the way, I think got the biggest to lose, way past their sell by date. They're owned by private equity. I think they've got a number of challenges, and I don't know how they do well in this transition. But anyway, we got to get here to Infocom.
Well, before we do
David,
that, can I make one quick comment on
oh,
that
please
conversation?
do, please do.
I'm hardly the contact center or customer experience center expert in this conversation, but I do want to make one observation a bit from the distance. There was a time about 10 or 15 years ago where everybody was very proud of the fact that most of their contact center was offshore. And they were able to lower costs, and they were able to have large warehouses of people answering calls for pennies on the dollar instead of what it would have cost here. And then there was a backlash against that, and you started to see companies talking about how all of our contact centers are in region, are here in the U.S. for United States people, or here in Europe, or whatever. I'm thinking you're probably going to see the same thing around contact center, customer experience, and AI, probably within the next year or two. I think that I was actually literally, while you're talking, I was answering somebody on LinkedIn. There is this huge dichotomy of view around AI where people love it and people hate it. And I think the fact that we don't use AI to provide customer service is going to be a selling point going forward. There's going to be a backlash here that some companies going to use as a differentiator. So that's the one argument I would say. You guys are pretty much discussing how AI will be absorbed into these workflows, and I'm simply saying you're probably going to get one or two companies out there saying that they're proud of the fact that they don't do that. So it's a
Yeah,
blind spot for all of us.
Maybe, but those companies are going to have to charge a hell of a lot more for their services because they're not going to
yep.
be able to reach the same number of customers as a company that can scale with AI. It's no longer a zero marginal cost thing. You're going to have to pay to acquire these new customers because every interaction is going to cost you something. But
Yeah.
the reality is, if you can have 300,000 conversations happening in a week with AI, how many people are you going to need for the same level of scale?
That's an easy thing to broadcast an ad against, saying, would you rather have 300,000 useless conversations or one valuable one? So
Well,
again, I think we're going to see this as a point.
But T-Mobile did that a few years ago, back when they had the old CEO, the great CEO that before the acquired Sprint. And they made this big campaign about how they actually answer your call when you call customer service, and they did a wonderful campaign around this. It was great. I was a T-Mobile customer at the time, and I was amazed. I would call T-Mobile for service, and they answered. They always took care of my problems. It was fantastic. And they had all these commercials bashing, deflection practices and all these, what other companies do. Of course, if you call T-Mobile today, you're going to get deflected and you're going to get lots of automation. That was a great little stunt. Again, got them lots of attention. And then, of course, once they got a little bigger and they finished their merger, they went back to the same old tactics because it's just too expensive. And so the other thing too is that one thing that AI is doing that is really changing the game is breaking international or language barriers. I actually watched a YouTube podcast the other day. I didn't actually watch it, but I found a great YouTube podcast. It was an interview, and it was in Japanese. And it didn't stop me, right? I just pulled down the transcript, loaded it into a notebook, and asked a bunch of questions and got the information I needed. The fact that the language is no longer a barrier is just completely changing almost everything. And so you talk about customer service in India and whatever offshore. That's had various reactions from the customers, but the whole concept of language is going to go away with AI. I think it's a fascinating development.
Yeah.
But we got to get to Infocom. That was one of the bigger events last month.
I did
and
get
David,
to
you were
Infocom.
actually there. Let's
Yes.
talk about a conference that we actually attended this time. So, David, tell us about Infocom.
Well, Infocom is the annual AV, and it's morphed into collaboration and
And
experience
AI.
and yeah, all of it, and AI. Well, everything's got AI bolted onto it nowadays, scotch taped and duct taped. What was interesting about a few things interesting about the show this year, they had let's call them, because we have been Enterprise Connect style keynotes which they'd never had before. And that partially came out of the fact that Microsoft's representatives are now on the board of Avixa and wanted to use this as a venue to have these. And there were two main keynotes given during the show expo hours. One from Ilya Buchstein from Microsoft and one from Espen Loberg from Cisco. So, and generally both talking about the same thing but in different ways.
And Ilya was in the ESPN keynote, and so
Yes.
Microsoft loves events that they control, and so
Yes. Yes, and but everybody was in the Espen keynote. Espen's keynote was the next guest please sign in. He was doing demos every few minutes, and Ilya was pretty much talking about Ilya with what Microsoft was doing. So two slightly different styles, not one better, not one worse. But keynotes were only a part of it. This is probably my I don't know my 30th, 40th Infocom show, and we've been talking about interoperability since video conferencing existed. And this year, like most years, it came to a head because there were a lot of people out there showing the kind of interoperability that Microsoft said is impossible. So whether it really is impossible, or it's just against their business requirements, or it breaks something that shouldn't be broken, we're going to see that conversation happen a lot more over the course of the next few weeks and months going forward.
Well, we know from years of extensive experience in this industry that the market leaders are always the ones who are opposed to interoperability. They have nothing to gain by it and more to lose, where the smaller vendors always gain more with interop.
Yeah, but the point that I put forward actually even before the show, and I'm very happy to be, forgive the cliche, but be a thought leader in this piece, is that is there really an advantage anymore? Is anybody going to move off of Microsoft Teams that has settled on it because it works better with Zoom? I think those days have passed. And the point that I was making is it's time to give it up because you're going to earn more brownie points with your customers if you're more open than if you're less open. And we're starting to see some platforms see that. So that's why I thought this year was particularly interesting around an inflection point. We also saw some things we'd never seen before. We saw QSys improve their Vision Suite products, came out with a Windows-based bar, while everybody and their mother-in-law is making an Android-based bar, which I thought was a very interesting move on their part, and their reasons for that. We saw some of the Asian manufacturers jumping into the space instead of with typical Me Too products with some really innovative things. We had Insta360 had a video bar that had an EPTZ camera, and inside the other lens it had an actual gimbal based camera, just like on one of their little action cams, which I'd not seen before. So a lot of innovation that we hadn't seen before. Dave, I know you're very happy with your new bone conduction headsets that Shocks was showing off. Instead of their older bone conduction headsets, it's now bone conduction and open ear combined, which is doing some things. So I wouldn't say that, like we've changed the space in any great way, but there were these little innovations, and there was this quiet acceptance that DV-LED has now replaced all of the other technologies in terms of large screen display. So that was one of the big things. There were more end users this year from a percentage basis than there were exhibitors. There's some argument whether or not there are actually more people or less people than the show at its peak. It depends. I had 3 badges because I was there under 3 different titles. Am I 3 people or 1 person, and how is that counted? And they've never opened the book, so we don't know the answer to that. It was also the last year for their current leadership. Their CEO is retiring, so we're going to get some new leadership around Infocom coming in at an interesting time because there were a lot of long-standing vendors that have been exhibiting at the show for 20 and 30 years saying, all right, so Cisco and Microsoft step in and all of a sudden they're doing keynotes. What are we, chopped liver? What we've been trying to do this for years. Where's our shot at this? So there may be a change of format and a change of style.
So let me ask you a question on Kane's behalf here, since we have a guest. My question is, Kane's a professional podcaster. You went to CES in January, and you came back with lots of new ideas for video equipment and blogging and podcasting, etc. But CES is a big show, and you only saw a small segment of it with the video stuff. Infocom is a big show, but again, you only saw a small part of it but it had the latest and greatest in meeting room solutions from the whole meeting room ecosystem. All the vendors were there. Zoom was there. Cisco was there. Microsoft was there. I assume Google was there. So my question is, if you're a professional podcaster like Kane, Where do you go if you want the latest and greatest in equipment for like his studio?
You know what's interesting? It's a great question, Dave. Absolutely great question. The what's interesting is that's what the fight is over right now. None of these showrooming shows are really relevant anymore because most of the bigger players, as you point out, with Cisco Live, with Microsoft, with Zoom, everybody does their own event, whether it's virtual or in person. They're all controlling the message. So these big events, Infocom used to have what they called a projector shootout, a projection shootout, where all the projectors would be lined up and you could compare them. They're dead. Nobody wants to compare their stuff to anybody else's stuff. But the fight for the content creator, I see taking place to a certain extent at CES, although CES is really more of a technology futures thing. There's good stuff there, but I would call it an offshoot. I think NAB is fighting for it. NAB wants to be, well, we're not just about broadcasting, we're broader casting, we're content creators. I think Infocom is fighting for that space right now because Infocom is talking about how, well, these are not just collaboration spaces, these are studios. I think that the fight for that audience is going to be an interesting one to follow going forward. I think that between NAB and Infocom, I don't know that CES is the right show for a podcaster, unless you're covering the show, which again, everybody's making accommodations to do that now.
All
So,
right,
so
Kane. So I'll put you on the spot. You are a professional podcaster. David and I can never really talk about the equipment we use because we're agnostic, but you can. What equipment are you using, and do you like it? Or are you happy with it?
Yeah, I mean, this is a Audio Technica mic. What is it? MV88? Is it? I don't know exactly what it is, but anyway, I've had this for a long time. It's perfect. I've got a Shure SM 50. What is it? SM. Can't remember what it is anyway. Some sort of podcast. I should know what it is because it's quite a nice one. The Rode kind of desk, camera switcher. I mean, I go through phases where I do a lot of research. I go to a few kind of events. I watch a lot of YouTube stuff and try and find all the gear. But then once I've got it, I kind of get quite happy with it. And I kind of still this mic. I bought this mic when I first started the podcast in 2018, and I've got it ever since. If something sounds good, it sounds good. But I think that the kind of points you were making there in terms of like the content creator, I think what's interesting is, and I'd be interested in getting you guys' perception on this in terms of are these vendors moving in this direction. For example, I had ING on a podcast just published last week. And, I spend a lot of time talking to different companies, different enterprises. And what I've noticed is that some of them have started now having dedicated spaces for doing things like
Yeah.
content. Like the fellow I introduced at ING, Bahadir, he was in a gorgeous room, lovely setup, lovely backdrop, good camera, good mic. And they had like half of the gear that I've got here, like the Rode mixing desk and all that. They had all that ready. And so it's like, I think that we're kind of moving into a place where businesses are beginning to realize that the individuals that work there are quite important. And if those individuals can build their brand, it's good for the company, especially if you've got senior executives who are appearing on podcasts talking about how great you're doing with AI, and being able to give them people the equipment and the gear to make it, make the mic sound good, the camera's looking good, the lighting's good. If you've got spaces where you can do that kind of thing, Zoom are great at that. I don't know if you've been to the office that they have in London. They've got some
mhm.
fantastic kind of equipment and meeting rooms and all that kind of. Again, studio is I'd probably call it a studio rather than a meeting room. But it's like, if you know what I'm saying. So I think there's a movement now where I think some businesses are starting to realize that it's not necessarily about meeting rooms, although it is, but it's also about giving their people places to create and content, because everyone is now a content creator, and your staff are some of the best sources of branding.
David, you should offer background professional services to help
Yeah.
help organizations with all the swag you have.
I'm just looking for innovation like everybody else. Like we saw, and again, I'm going to mention their name again, Insta360 come out with content creator microphones, Bluetooth microphones that use e-paper. Now that e-paper is in the public domain, you can put your logo on the microphone that people are
Yeah.
wearing. You know what? I've not seen that before. I thought that was cool. The mic happens to work well as well, but again, you're using an Audio Technica microphone. Right now, I'm using a Sennheiser microphone. A lot of people have Shure microphones out there. You get to a certain level, and the quality is okay. There are people that want to go past that level, and I get that, and they're using DSLRs as cameras, and they're doing a lot of other things. But up to a certain level, when I built TV studios for Mike Bloomberg, he used to say that today's news is tomorrow's garbage. And I always
Mhm.
argued with him saying that honestly, sometimes today's news is today's garbage. that nobody really cares about the quality. If they see the event that you happen to be covering, that you covered with, a
Yesterday's
smartphone
news is
camera.
garbage. Our stuff is always great.
I guess the what he was saying and what I'm saying is that if you've got the coverage of the event that's happening, whether it's the eclipse or the announcement that a new CEO is coming in, or some new country has their own leader, if you're capturing that on the least lowest quality audio and the least quality video, but you've got the actual content because you were there and it's real and it's not made up over AI, do you really care that the quality wasn't the best in the world? You could run the audio through an AI algorithm and make it sound better. You can improve the video quality the same way, but do you really care that it was shot on a smartphone? So that was really innovative for its time, and I think that's
I always think back of you're one of the few people that goes back as long as I do. A lot of my references, people just have no idea what I'm talking about. But do you remember on the old SNL, like 20, 30 years ago, Al Franken had the one man correspondent that he went out
yes.
and he had like the satellite dish on his head. Every time he turned his head, the signal went out. And it was just, he's trying to be this newscaster on the road by himself. I always thought those were fantastic, but the it's amazing. I mean, you and I both carry a lot of gear when we go out to events, and I know that and we use it a lot. But the amount of stuff available for content creators is just that is becoming the kind of the main story.
And growing, exactly.
Our
All
stuff.
right. Okay.
But
But
David,
you know,
hey, I'm going to cut you off, David, because we're out of time, and I know we got. I had a lot more topics here I wanted to cover, but I think we need to wrap up this episode here.
okay.
So, Kane, I want to thank you so much for joining us. It's fantastic getting your views on this, and we'll be back next month with a recap of June news.
Nice one. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks,
Thanks so
everyone.
much for having me along. Appreciate it.